So we're going to take a look at energy and enzymes in this module. So an organism's metabolism will transform matter and energy. So we just need to define what matter and energy are first. So matter is just anything that has mass or weight and takes up space. So for example, these flowers, that would be matter. This hummingbird, that would also be considered matter as well. And then energy is just defined as the ability to do work. And there are some different types of work that organisms do. So one would be mechanical work. Mechanical work would just be physically moving something around. So for example, like contracting muscles in this hummingbird's wings and then flapping the wings to fly, that would be mechanical work. In us, like when we contract our muscles in our legs, walk around, we move our body, that would be mechanical work. Transport work, that would be like active transport across the cell membrane. So, and remember when we do active transport, we're going to be moving the molecules from low to high concentrations, going up the concentration gradient. And we're going to use a little transport protein to get the molecules across the membrane, and we need energy to do this. And then chemical work, that would be, for example, doing anabolic reactions. So that's when we take smaller molecules and we put them together to make a larger molecule. And we'll talk about those more in another recording. Okay, so there's just some different forms of energy that we're going to be talking about. So let's define these. So heat energy, that's just the kinetic energy of randomly moving atoms or molecules. So we can see in this little animation here some representations of heat energy. So you can see our molecules moving around just randomly. And the picture on the left has more heat energy because the molecules are moving faster than the picture on the right where the molecules are moving slower and they have less heat energy. And then light energy is just kinetic energy that travels in waves. So light energy travels as a wave, and that is just all light energy is. And then chemical energy is a form of potential or stored energy. And this is going to be energy that's stored in chemical bonds. So all of this food here is made up of lots of different macromolecules. For example, there's some proteins in here, there's some fats or triglycerides, there's some carbohydrates, there's probably some nucleic acids in here as well. And all of those chemical bonds that are holding all of those macromolecules together are storing energy. And then when we eat the food and we break apart the food, we break those chemical bonds, we actually release that energy, and then we can use that energy to do work in our body. Okay, so organisms are energy transformers. So we are able to transform energy from one form to another. So let's just take a look at some examples here. So organisms that are able to do photosynthesis, they are able to convert the light energy coming from the sun into chemical energy. So this tree here, this oak tree, is able to take carbon dioxide gas from the air and combine it with some water, and then they're able to make their own food. So they can actually make some glucose, and then from that glucose they can also actually make all the other macromolecules that they need, so proteins and lipids and nucleic acids and all that stuff. And then we have our squirrel here who is eating the acorns, and so there's chemical energy stored in the acorns, and then when the squirrel eats the macromolecules that are stored in the nuts, The squirrel will then break down the chemical bonds in those macromolecules and release that energy stored in those chemical bonds, and then convert that energy into energy so it can do work like maybe climbing the tree or whatever, running away from predators, and use that to do work. Okay, so thermodynamics is just the study of energy transformations, and there's two laws of thermodynamics. So there's the first law of thermodynamics and the second law of thermodynamics. Let's start with the first law of thermodynamics. So all the first law of thermodynamics just says is that energy can be transformed from one form to another. So like you can transform light energy into chemical energy, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So you can't create energy and you can't destroy energy. So the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. So this is just called the conservation of energy. And it just says that the total amount of energy that's present in the universe when it formed about 13.8 billion years ago is the same amount of energy that's present today. So that's kind of crazy to think about, but that's true. So the whole point of this first law of thermodynamics is that organisms cannot make their own energy and must capture it from their surroundings. So make sure that you know this first law of thermodynamics for the exam. So that would be pretty important to know that energy can be transformed or converted from one form to another, but it can't be created and it can't be destroyed. Okay, so this is just the point of that first law of thermodynamics. So all organisms must capture energy from their environment. So you can see the photosynthetic organisms will capture the light energy, and they'll do photosynthesis and actually make their own food. And then here we've got a red-tailed hawk who has captured a squirrel and is now getting the chemical energy from eating the squirrel, and then will convert that into other chemicals in its body and then break down those chemicals and maybe use that energy to do work to fly away and move its body or something. Okay, and then the second law of thermodynamics. This one just says that in nature, things like to proceed in the direction that spreads out the energy or increases the random arrangement of matter or increases disorder or what we call entropy. Okay, so it just says that things like to spread out and become disordered. Okay, so think about like your bedroom at home. It's pretty easy for it to become messy. Things like to get spread out and go all over the place, and you've got to put energy in to make it neat again. Okay, so much easier to make it messy than, to put in all that energy to clean it up again. Okay, so make sure you know what entropy, that definition is. Entropy is just a measure of the randomness or disorder. And let's just take a look at a few examples of the second law of thermodynamics. So this first one, diffusion. So if you put some food coloring into some water, so it starts off, with a drop of food coloring, and then the dye is just gonna spread out. It's gonna diffuse out until it's equal and spread out evenly throughout the water. Okay, so it just wants to spread out and become more randomly arranged and more disordered, more spread out from when it was concentrated from that one drop that you started off with. Another example here would be when you break a polymer like this protein into the individual subunits or monomers. So break our protein apart into the individual amino acids, it's much easier to break something apart than it is to put something back together. Okay, because it takes more energy to put those amino acids back together to make the protein. It's much easier to break it apart. Okay, so kind of the other part of the second law of thermodynamics is that when we transform energy from one form to another, some of the energy is going to be converted to heat energy. And heat energy is a more spread out, random form of energy. And heat energy, unfortunately, is not usable by the cells to do any work with. So we can't do any work with heat energy. So it does keep us warm. So it helps with our body temperature, but that's it. We can't use heat energy to contract our muscles or do anything else with it. So it's just not able to be used to do work with our cells. So the big point of the second law of thermodynamics is that no energy transfer or conversion is 100% efficient. You're always going to lose some energy as heat. So for example, a gas car engine is only 25% efficient. So that means if you fill your tank up with 10 gallons of gas, only 2.5 gallons is actually going to go towards moving your car. And then the other 7.5 gallons is actually going to be lost as heat energy. And that, I don't know, that makes me mad because that's a lot of money wasted on gas that just goes to heating up your engine and not actually driving your car. Okay, cellular respiration, which is what our cells use to break down our food, and we temporarily store the energy from our food as ATP before we use it to do work in our cells. That's 40% efficient. So at least we're more efficient than the gas cars. But we still lose about 60% of the energy from our food as heat energy, and that ends up as our body heat. So it still does some good. It keeps us warm, but we can't do any work with that. Okay, so for organisms, because of the second law of thermodynamics, organisms must capture more energy from the environment than the amount needed to do work, because we are going to lose some of the energy as heat energy. So when chemical reactions occur, some energy is lost as heat energy. So this is important to remember for the test as well. So you can see that we've got some glucose here that maybe we've eaten, and we're going to break that down. And as we break down all the chemical bonds holding the glucose together, we're going to release that energy stored in the glucose. And then we're going to temporarily store that energy in the glucose as ATP. And then later on, when we need that energy from the ATP, we can break down the ATP and release that energy. And then we can use that energy to do work in our cell. Maybe we're, gonna move our muscles. Maybe we're gonna, make a protein. Maybe we're going to do active transport, whatever the work is. But you can see that each time we do a chemical reaction and release energy, we are going to be losing some of that energy as heat energy because we're not 100% efficient each time we convert the energy from one form to another. And that's because of that second law of thermodynamics. And here's just a nice visual, just a reminder of the first law of thermodynamics. And the first law just says that energy can be converted from one form to another. So here we've got the chemical energy in the fish, and it is being converted to chemical energy now that is in the bear. So maybe the bear is going to be storing the chemical energy it's gotten from the bear as maybe, or from the fish, maybe as some proteins in its muscles, or maybe some fat, whatever it's going to be in there. And then also the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can't be created and it can't be destroyed. So as a result of that, organisms have to capture energy from the environment, which you can see the bear is done here. All right, so with our second law of thermodynamics, we've got written here that organisms are highly ordered, and in order to maintain that order, they have to keep putting energy in to maintain that order. So that's good for them, but that does increase entropy elsewhere in the universe. So what we mean by that is that when you're using energy to maintain the order in your body, you're doing chemical reactions and things like that, and you're converting energy from one form to another, and you are losing some energy as heat energy. And that is a more spread out form of energy, and you are increasing the entropy or the disorder of the universe. Okay, so that would be important to remember. Okay, and so the second law of thermodynamics, besides saying that things like to proceed in the direction where we increase entropy, it also says that when you transform energy from one form to another, we're never 100% efficient, and we always lose some energy as heat energy. And heat energy we can't use to do any work by the cells. Okay, this would also be important to know how to answer these questions. So if you look at this picture over here on the right, how does energy enter most ecosystems? So we can see that most of the time in most ecosystems, energy is going to enter as light energy. And if we follow the light energy, you can see that it's going to get converted into chemical energy by this plant here. And then that can get converted to other chemical energy by these decomposers. And then we also have a caterpillar eating the leaf, gets converted into chemical energy in the caterpillar, and then the robin eats the caterpillar, gets converted into chemical energy here in the robin. And so you can see that we're converting energy, as we go through the ecosystem here. And so the light energy being converted to chemical energy, and then to another chemical energy, to another chemical energy. Remember that we're not 100% efficient each time we convert from one form of energy to another, and each time we're going to be losing some heat energy. So eventually all of this light energy is going to exit the ecosystem as heat energy. Okay. So is energy recycled? So do we keep reusing it over and over again? Does it go round and round and round and we keep using it over and over again? It doesn't. So it's going to go through and it's going to leave as heat. So it's not recycled. So you have to keep putting in more sunlight because it keeps leaving as heat. Okay, so if the sun, when it eventually, goes out, which it will one day, but that's way, way, way in the future, everything on the Earth will die because there's no more light energy coming in. So, and then we'll run out of energy. I know that's very depressing, but okay. And then what about matter? Do we recycle matter? Okay, and the matter could be nutrients. Yes, we definitely do recycle the nutrients, right? So we do recycle the matter. So that does get recycled. Okay, so I would know the answers to those questions.